Hello friends, and welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm really glad you're here. If you're new here, my name is Becca, and this channel is all about my love for knitting, spinning, weaving, crocheting, sewing, all the fiber things. If you're enjoying this fiber adventure, please consider leaving a like or a comment or subscribing to my channel. I invite you to grab whatever project you have on the go and join me. Let's make some stuff. Over the last few videos, I've been sharing some works in progress, and you might have already noticed what I'm wearing. This is my finished hand-spun gradient sweater. All this yarn is yarn that I spun. It's all wool, but from different breeds, potentially different blends of wool. And I spun it on different wheels and different spindles and using different methods. So the yarn was not meant to go together, but I thought that the gradient from the deep midnight and black and midnight blue and turquoise into the purple at the bottom, was a nice gradient. And I love the way it's turned out. It fits beautifully. I used a percentage sort of recipe instead of an actual pattern for this, but I did have a few hiccups along the way. The first one was that this is knit in the round from the top down, and then the sleeves are added after the body is complete. I forgot to do the last round of increases on the yoke and had to rip back a few inches there. Got through the body and then started on one of the sleeves according to my recipe and finished the full sleeve because it's very difficult to sort of try on the sleeve as you go. So I finished the sleeve. Took me about a day to knit the sleeve. I think it was probably a Saturday, and so I had all day to do nothing but knit, which was fantastic. And I tried it on, and the sleeve was a bit too tight. I thought it would probably not block out and needed a few more stitches. So I went ahead and started the second sleeve, added a few more stitches, and then tried it on with both of the sleeves. Liked the second one quite a bit more, and so then I pulled out the first sleeve and made those modifications, and I just love it. I love how it fits. It blocked beautifully, but it took several days to dry. It is very thick and cozy wool. So finally, I have a new sweater. My next finished object is my samurai socks. These are the samurai pattern from Judy Sumner's book, Knitted Socks East and West, that uses Japanese knitting stitches in traditional sock patterns. This pattern has a plain foot, and then the cuff has this textured and cabled pattern which looks like sort of woven mats, and the twisting of the samurai attire. And it's just, I love the texture. I love how it's turned out on this tweedy wool. This wool is from Knit Picks. It's their Stroll Tweed, and this color is Barn Door, so sort of a wine red color with flecks in it. The tweed flecks are everything from sort of a cream to a brown to black, so they have some variability in them, and they're just super soft and super cozy, and I just am really pleased with how they turned out. So samurai socks, another finished object. And while we're on the subject of the projects that I've been working on lately, I did want to share with you where I'm at with my one ring scarf winter knit along. I have been making progress, as you can see. So of my 8-page pattern of the text, I've nearly finished 2 of those pages. So still quite a ways to go, but we're still in winter for a while yet. And I'll just continue working on this. It is going quite smoothly. It is a double knitting pattern, if you haven't seen it before. And I'm using super fine needles. These are size 1 US straight needles, so super tiny, but it's really turning out nicely. This yarn is a merino silk blend from the Farmer's Daughter that I purchased from my local yarn shop, and I just love the way it's turning out, and I can't wait for it to be all finished so that I can wear it. So in one of my previous videos, I shared with you my Night Sky beaded wrap pattern. That's part of my Knitted Kansas collection. This pattern is now available on my Ravelry and my Etsy shop for free, so you can go there and download it. But I did ask in the that previous video if any of you would like a tutorial, sort of a how I do beaded knitting, and I got some comments back that yes, you would. So today I do want to share with you how I do knitting with beads in sort of a little tutorial. There are many ways, just like with any crafting, there are many ways to do all of these techniques. So this is just how I do it, and hopefully it's helpful to you. But we'll go through that. But also I thought, since this is a very simple pattern, some of you may have never read a pattern before, or may be interested in writing your own patterns but don't know where to start. So I thought I would go through how I write a simple pattern in a little bit more detail and share that with you today. So knitting with beads is fairly straightforward. This pattern is actually a rectangular wrap, and it's quite long, and it is it's a simple pattern. So it's just garter stitch with a seed stitch border, and then the beads are placed throughout, and you can see them from both sides, so they sort of sparkle. This is my second beaded knitting project. The first one that I made was also a scarf. I think that beaded knitting works really well with scarves, but this is a lace and beaded at the ends scarf that is using kid silk haze from Rowan Yarns. So that is a mohair silk blend. It's super lightweight, very drapey, and I knit this along the long edge. So the long edge was cast on, then I knit across the scarf and cast off at the other side, which makes it, the cast on and cast off edge have a slightly different stretch to them. And that means that the scarf sort of has a curved shape to it. So it sits really nicely around my neck and shoulders, which I thought was kind of a neat little addition. So I knitted along, and then the beads are only on the ends. They're super tiny silvery gray seed beads against this light pink of the yarn. I just absolutely adore this yarn, especially for scarves. I made a similar scarf. It was a Mobius scarf head covering for my mother, who, you know, she gets her hair done, and it's, she doesn't want to crush it under a heavy hat, so she just loved it when I made this for her, and she wears it every winter, and she can just take it and tuck it away nicely in her pocket and take it out when she wants to put it on. So I would definitely encourage you to try the Kid Silk Haze, because it's so cozy and warm. It's really lofty and traps a lot of warmth in there, but it's not going to be heavy and difficult to wear. But the beads on the end, this was the first time I tried doing beads, and I really liked the way it turned out. I was a bit surprised that they were so easy to do. And so that's what I'd like to share with you now, is how I knit with beads. The first step in knitting with beads is to get those beads strung onto your yarn. And so you want to thread your working yarn onto a needle that will accommodate the yarn through the eye, but then also fit through the hole in the center of your bead. And you can go ahead and string on as many beads as you'd like. If this is a pattern that is only going to use a few beads, you can string them all on at once. If it's many beads, you might want to do this in chunks. And when you do this sort of depends on the pattern and the beads themselves, because as you work, as you do your knitting, you're going to be sliding those beads down along the working yarn, which does cause some friction damage. So if you have a really fragile yarn that can't handle that friction, or if the beads themselves have sort of a sharper edge on that inner hole, that might cause more damage. You might want to think about threading fewer beads closer to where you're going to be placing them. You can always break the yarn and add more beads if you need to. But in this case, I threaded on several beads, as you can see. And I just sort of slide them down out of the way so that I have enough working yarn to do some knitting. I'm starting on this sample here, just casting on a few stitches and doing sort of a sample mock-up of the pattern that I used for the night sky wrap. So my first few rows are in seed stitch. Seed stitch is where you alternate between knit and purl on every stitch and then turn the work, and then you switch and knit the purl stitches and purl the knit stitches, so you get sort of this alternating pattern. I do that for a few rows because that's the border along the bottom, and then I switch to the main body of the scarf where the background in the center is garter stitch. So knit every row, so you knit, turn, knit, turn, knit, turn. So there's no right side and wrong side, but the stitches along the outside edges are also seed stitch, continuing that border around. I'll knit a few rows of this garter stitch background, and then I'll start placing the beads. So to place the beads, you take the first bead that's on your working yarn and pull it up when you're at the stitch where you're going to place the bead. You pull it up and snug it up close to your knitting needles. Go ahead and wrap the yarn around your knitting needles like usual, and that locks it into place. And then on the next row, as you knit those stitches, it's just firmly in place and it's not going to go anywhere. And that's really all there is to it. So you can see here again, I've come to the next stitch, grabbed one of the beads, pulled it snug up to where my needles are, wrap the yarn, and then continue knitting on. So it's super simple to add beads to your knitting this way. While we're talking about this simple pattern, I want to just sort of walk you through how to read a pattern and how to write a simple pattern like this. So a pattern usually starts with the name, as you probably have already guessed. The name is usually descriptive of what type of pattern or item it is. So in this case, a wrap or a sweater or a hat. But it may also have some sort of evocative component. Like in this case, I've named this pattern the Night Sky Wrap, in part because the yarn that I've chosen, which is Malabrigo, in this beautiful midnight blue with sort of lighter areas, which I felt was evocative of the night sky on a mostly clear night in the middle of winter when it's nice and cold and you have some just tiny light clouds, but the stars are really poking through and sparkling brightly. So the Night Sky Wrap is the title of this pattern. Then the next section is usually a brief description of the pattern itself. So mine in this case is very brief. It is a long beaded rectangular knit wrap and garter stitch. So just giving the person who's looking at the pattern a little bit more detail from just the title that they might not get. This section would also be where the sizes written in the pattern would go. So in this case, the wrap is only one size, so that's not part of this pattern. But if you were making a sweater in multiple sizes, or a hat pattern in multiple sizes, or sock pattern in multiple sizes, that would go in the pattern description. And then you have a section for the materials that are needed for the project. So this will have yarn and needles or hook for a crochet pattern in all of the patterns. And then you also have other tools or items that are needed to complete the project. So for the beaded wrap, we obviously need beads. So there's a description of the beads in that section, as well as the tapestry needle needed to thread the beads onto the yarn. When you're describing the yarn in this section, the pattern should include information about the yarn company that made the yarn, the specific product line, the yarn weight, the color that was used in the samples, the estimated length, and the number of balls or skeins or hanks that are needed to complete the project. And that will vary if you have multiple sizes, so that needs to be in there as well. The needles need to include both the suggested needle size and then whether they are straight, circular needles, or double-pointed needles that were used to make the pattern. This section will also include gauge, which is the number of stitches and rows, usually in 4 inches by 4 inches, but may also be 10 in centimeters, so 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. That's approximately the same size. Sometimes it's written as stitches per inch, although this is less common. So because we are making a simple rectangular wrap pattern, the gauge isn't very critical in this case. The finished object will just be slightly larger or slightly smaller if you're using a different gauge than I had. However, I still do include a gauge so that the people who are looking at the pattern will know what size the finished object should be and whether they're likely to get the same size. It does matter, however, quite a lot if you are making a pattern that is fitted and if the size really matters. So this can be both the stitch gauge, but also the row gauge if length is important. For the wrap, row gauge doesn't matter at all because the pattern just states to knit it until it is as long as you'd like it to be, or the length that I made it. So however many rows that isn't critical. Next in a pattern, there will be definitions for any special stitches, abbreviations, or possibly charts. In our beaded wrap pattern, we have a bead placement chart at this point. And the charts should give you enough information to cover the full repeat of a pattern. You need to have the full repeat and know very clearly where the pattern is repeating so that if the pattern changes, like if in a fitted garment, if the number of stitches in your row changes, you need to know where that chart is going to be placed. It's also good if you can put schematics for sizing in this section. So if you're writing a pattern for a sweater, you could have a line drawing of the sweater with measurements for the body, the length, the sleeve length, the cuff circumference, neck circumference, or any other relevant measurements. That's super helpful for people who are trying to decide which size they need to make. And now we get to the actual pattern instructions. These are usually written so that any separate pieces are written in separate sections. So the body, the sleeve, the cuff, the hem for a hat, etc. And they're written as row by row and then shortened into repeating sections and abbreviated with common or previously defined stitches like K for knit, P for purl, K2 TOG for knit 2 together. And step 1 for the knitting is usually casting on. But as I mentioned earlier, for a beaded pattern, the first step is actually to string the beads along your working yarn. And then you cast on the required number of stitches. We are making an 18-inch wide wrap and we have a gauge of 18 stitches over 4 inches, which would be, if you divide 18 by 4, you get 4.5 stitches per inch. And so we're going to cast on 80 stitches, 4.5 times 18 inches to get 80 stitches. So the first line of our pattern then is string the beads along the yarn. Second line, cast on 80 stitches. As I said earlier, our wrap is primarily garter stitch, but we have a seed stitch border all around. So the first 4 rows will be all in seed stitch. So rows 1 to 4 knit in seed stitch. And then on row 5, we start and end each row with 4 stitches of seed stitch, and then switch to the garter stitch in the middle. So rows 5 to 8, knit, seed stitch, 4 stitches, garter stitch, 72 stitches, 4 stitches seed stitch. And then we start the bead placement chart. And we don't have to put much information in the text because we have the placement of the chart. And we're going to continue with the seed stitch, garter stitch, seed stitch for the rest of the body of the wrap. I made my wrap quite long, but others might not want that, so I said just to continue it as long as you like, or 72 inches, which is how long I made mine. And then you repeat the seed stitch at the final end to complete the outside border. Cast off and weave in all the ends. The last section of a pattern is finishing that's needed. Any other finishing, such as seaming pieces together or sewing on buttons, goes here. Blocking is always a part of a pattern, and for this case, for the wrap, there's a description of the blocking, dimensions, and how to handle the beads. So specifically, you wanted to stretch the garter stitch out so that the beads are visible on both sides of the fabric. Garter stitch has a tendency to compress together, so then it's possible that the beads wouldn't be visible, certainly not from both sides. So by stretching it out during blocking, that allows the beads to show up on both sides. That's it for this video. My night sky wrap is now available for free on my Ravelry and Etsy shops. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope that you'll give it a try. Thank you for spending some of your creative time with me. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!